Imagine you've traveled back in time to ancient Rome. You see a legionnaire. What's the first thing that catches your eye? Most likely, it's his shiny armor and intimidating helmet with a red crest. Now imagine that this fierce warrior approaches you and says, "Hey friend, you thought I was wearing this for no reason?" In popular culture, this image has become canonical. But how accurate is it historically? If you dig deeper, you'll find that a Roman soldier's equipment was much more complex and sophisticated. It wasn't just a pile of metal, but a carefully balanced set of items, where every detail had a purpose. The Romans were perfectionists in military affairs, and their approach to equipment was no exception. They didn't just create clothes and armor, they designed a system capable of withstanding long marches, fierce battles, and the harshest weather conditions. Watch the video to the end to find out how Roman sandals were both footwear and weapons. The first and most important piece of clothing for a Roman soldier was the tunic. It was a simple but functional garment, usually made of wool. The length of the tunic varied, but it most often reached the knees. Wool was chosen for a reason. It was durable, wick. Contrary to popular belief, not all tunics were red. The color depended on the dyes available and the status of the unit, but most often they were neutral shades. The most common tunic was white, undyed, which was easier to clean and keep in decent condition. Under the tunic, a legionnaire could wear a loincloth, which provided additional protection and comfort during long marches. This raises another question. Why didn't the Romans, who were such innovators in military affairs, use pants? In fact, they considered them barbaric clothing, characteristic of Germanic and Gallic tribes. A long tunic and loincloth were considered sufficient for protection and comfort, although in cold weather soldiers could wear additional woolen pants, but they did so reluctantly only when necessary. These pants were loose-fitting and did not hug the legs, which distinguished them from modern clothing. Over the tunic, the legionary wore a leather belt called a cingulum. This belt was not just an item of clothing, but a symbol of military rank and distinction. A sword, dagger, and leather straps decorated with metal plates were attached to it, which served as additional protection. The more plates there were, the higher the status of the warrior. The cingulum was not only a functional element, but also an important part of the parade uniform. It showed that the warrior was ready for battle at any moment, and also served as a kind of calling card by which one could determine his rank and achievements. Another important piece of clothing was the sagum, a cloak made of thick woolen fabric. It was necessary for protection from rain, wind, and cold. The sagum was usually rectangular in shape and fastened on the shoulder with a metal clasp called a fibula. This cloak was so important that it was sometimes used as a temporary blanket during overnight stays. The color of the sagum could also vary, but it was most often dark red or brown so that dirt and dust were not so noticeable on it. Under the sagum, in cold weather, legionaries could wear a tunica, a thinner undergarment. This was necessary to keep warm and prevent the rough wool of the main tunic from rubbing against the skin. The tunica was usually made of linen and served for hygiene purposes, as it was easier to wash. Combined with the main tunic and sagum, this created a multi-layered system that allowed soldiers to adapt to a wide range of climatic conditions, from the hot climate of North Africa to the cold regions of Britain. Despite its apparent simplicity, the choice and care of clothing was an important part of a legionnaire's life. Every soldier kept his tunic clean and his sagum intact. Dirty or torn clothing could result in punishment. One of the main problems was the lack of laundries. Therefore, soldiers had to wash their clothes directly in rivers or streams, using sand and ash instead of soap. It was a laborious process that required a lot of time and effort, but it was necessary to maintain hygiene and prevent the spread of disease. What do you think was the most difficult part of caring for a tunic and sagum, considering all the hardships of military life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's move on to what everyone associates with Roman warriors: armor. The main armor of a Roman legionary was the segmentata. It consisted of wide metal strips that were fastened with leather straps and clasps. This design provided excellent protection against slashing blows, while allowing sufficient freedom of movement. Another equally common type of armor was chainmail, or lorica. It consisted of many small metal rings connected to each other. Chainmail was heavier but more flexible and durable. It lasted longer than plate armor and required less maintenance. Each piece of armor was a work of art, the result of the painstaking labor of blacksmiths. Initially, they were very expensive, but over time, Rome was able to establish mass production. From an early age, Roman warriors learned not only to fight, but also to become one with their armor. In addition to the main types of armor, legionaries used other protective elements. For example, a breastplate, which was often worn by centurions and standard-bearers. It could be made of metal or leather. Metal breastplates were usually bronze or iron, while leather ones were multi-layered, which made them very durable. Along with the lorica segmentata and lorica hamata, there were other types of armor, such as the lorica squamata, which was a type of scale armor. It consisted of many small metal plates sewn onto a leather or fabric base. Lorica squamata was very flexible and provided good protection against stabbing and slashing blows. It was popular among cavalry and officers as it provided greater mobility than chainmail or plate armor. Gaiters and bracers were also important elements of armor. Gaiters, or ocreae, protected the shins, while bracers, or manica, protected the forearms. These elements were optional for ordinary legionaries, but were often used by officers and gladiators. They were made of bronze or iron and attached to the legs and arms with leather straps. Greaves and bracers provided additional protection in close combat and allowed the warrior to feel more confident. Under the armor, the legionary wore a suburmale, a special undergarment. It was a quilted vest that protected the body from chafing and served as a shock absorber, softening blows. The suburmale was made of several layers of linen or wool and was a mandatory part of the equipment. It provided comfort and allowed the warrior to wear heavy armor for long periods of time without discomfort. The undergarment was so important that its absence could lead to serious injuries and abrasions. Each piece of armor was part of a unified system that allowed the legionnaire to act effectively in battle. It had to be not only durable, but also lightweight. The weight of a full set of armor, including a helmet, shield, and weapons, could reach 25 kilograms, but Roman engineers tried to minimize it so as not to hinder the warrior's movement. To do this, they used various alloys and metal processing technologies that allowed them to create lightweight but durable armor. As a result, the armor of a Roman legionary was not just protection, but a true work of engineering art. Every element was thought out to the smallest detail to ensure maximum effectiveness in battle. They were part of a warrior's life and his second skin. But what was the most important thing in the life of a Roman soldier, apart from his equipment and weapons? What detail, in your opinion, was the most important lifesaver on a campaign? At first glance, Roman sandals, or Caligae, may seem like frivolous footwear for a warrior. However, they were one of the most ingenious inventions of the Roman army. Caligae were made of durable leather, and the soles were studded with dozens, even hundreds, of iron nails. These nails not only prevented slipping, but also made the shoes incredibly durable. They were a kind of spike that allowed soldiers to move confidently over any terrain, from slippery mud to rocky roads. But the Caligae had another, more important function. During long marches, when a legionnaire walked 30 kilometers a day, these nails massaged the foot, stimulating blood circulation and preventing blisters. This allowed soldiers to move faster and without unnecessary fatigue. Each pair was made individually, and soldiers took great care of their shoes. Caligae were not just shoes, but a true symbol of the Roman military machine. Their design and functionality reflected the pragmatism and engineering genius that allowed Rome to expand its borders. The numerous nails hammered into the soles were not just a whim. They turned an ordinary sandal into an effective weapon capable of withstanding enormous loads. On the march, a legionnaire carried about 20-25 kilograms of equipment, which meant that every step required maximum stability. The nails provided reliable traction, allowing the soldier to avoid wasting energy on maintaining balance. This was critically important in combat, where any awkward movement could cost a life. Emperor Augustus played an important role in the history of Caligae. In his quest to strengthen the discipline and combat effectiveness of the army, he paid great attention to the equipment of the legionaries, and footwear was one of its key components. It was during his reign that the standard sizes and design of Caligae were standardized. This made it possible to mass produce them, which was necessary to maintain a huge army. Each pair, despite being individually fitted, met strict quality and reliability requirements. The shoes served a soldier for several years, and when the nails wore out, they could be easily replaced. This saved a lot of resources and time. In addition, Caligae were a symbol of status. Only full citizens of Rome who served in the legions had the right to wear them. The craftsmen who made this footwear took their work very seriously. They used only the best leather, most often oxhide, which was carefully soaked and treated to make it soft yet durable. Shoemakers, or Caligae, were respected specialists, and their craftsmanship was worth its weight in gold. They passed their secrets down from generation to generation, preserving traditions and the highest standards of quality. The foot massage provided by the nails was not just a side effect, but a deliberate element. The numerous nails, or Caligae, stimulated acupuncture points on the soles of the feet. While the Romans were unaware of the existence of acupuncture, they empirically established that such massage helped relieve tension and prevent blisters and calluses, which was a real lifesaver during long marches. Legionnaires covered dozens of kilometers every day on different types of roads. And tired feet could cause them to fall behind the unit, which was tantamount to death for a soldier. The genius of the Caligaes lay in their simplicity and reliability. They were a perfect example of how functional design can solve complex problems. The shoes not only protected the feet, but also helped soldiers maintain a fast pace, which ultimately contributed to the success of the entire army. During battles, the nails also served as additional weapons. A kick from a foot clad in Caligae could cause serious injury to an enemy. This footwear was proof that nothing was overlooked in the Roman army. Every detail, from the shield to the sandals, had a purpose and served a single goal: victory. Despite their apparent simplicity, Caligae were one of the most outstanding achievements of Roman military engineering. This footwear not only provided protection and comfort on long marches, but was also a powerful symbol of the legionary, his endurance, and his readiness for any challenge. Without reliable and functional footwear that could withstand enormous loads in days of marching, the Roman army would not have been able to conquer such vast territories. It was thanks to such seemingly insignificant details as nails in the soles that the Romans managed to build an empire that lasted for almost a millennium. The helmet was perhaps the most recognizable piece of a legionnaire's equipment. Early Roman helmets, such as the Montefortino, were simple and functional, with a conical shape and small cheek guards. Over time, their design became more complex and they were replaced by more sophisticated models, such as the Imperial Gallic helmet. It had wider cheek guards and a neck guard, which provided better protection for the head and neck. Plumes, or crests, were often attached to the top of the helmet, which could be of different colors depending on the soldier's rank or affiliation with a particular cohort. These helmets were not just protective gear, they were symbols. The Romans made them from iron or bronze, carefully polishing them to a mirror finish so that they would sparkle in the sun, striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. Helmets like Caligae underwent significant evolution, reflecting the development of Roman military tactics and metallurgy. Early helmets, such as the Montefortino, were simple and inexpensive, allowing them to equip a large army. They were spherical or conical in shape and equipped with cheek guards to protect the cheeks. This was basic but effective protection. With the development of the empire and the emergence of stronger and more technologically advanced enemies, Roman engineers began to look for more sophisticated solutions. This led to the Imperial Gallic helmets, which became true masterpieces of military art. The main material used to make helmets was bronze or iron, which was carefully processed and polished. Polishing was important not only for appearance. The mirror-like surface helped reflect the sun's rays, which could blind the enemy in the heat of battle. In addition, the shiny surface created a visual unity, making enemies think that they were facing not a scattered group of soldiers, but a monolithic, invincible army. This psychological effect was no less important than physical protection. During marches and parades, the gleaming helmets and armor made a lasting impression on civilians and intimidated potential rebels. In addition to their practical and psychological significance, helmets served another important purpose: to indicate rank and affiliation. Plumes were bright elements that were attached to the top of the helmet. The color and shape of the plume spoke volumes. For example, centurions wore special transverse crests that allowed their subordinates and commanders to easily see them in the heat of battle and follow their orders. Ordinary legionaries could have more modest plumes and sometimes did without them altogether. This helped maintain order in the ranks and increase the overall effectiveness of the units. The manufacture of a helmet was a complex and laborious process requiring great skill. Blacksmiths, or fabriae, underwent a long period of training to master all the intricacies of working with metal. They had to not only forge the helmet, but also make it strong, light, and comfortable to wear. The helmet had to fit the soldier's head perfectly so as not to hinder movement or cause discomfort during prolonged wear. Unfortunately, history has not preserved the names of many great master armorers, but their work speaks for itself. The helmets found by archaeologists often amaze with their preservation and high quality of workmanship. They are evidence that the Romans spared no effort or expense in equipping their soldiers, understanding that investment in the army was an investment in the future of the entire empire. Helmets were an integral part of the image of a Roman legionary, a symbol of his strength, discipline, and status. From simple head protection, they evolved into a complex tool that helped to win not only with strength, but also with intelligence. Now that we've covered head protection, let's talk about something even more important: the shield. By the way, do you know why Roman shields were so big? Maybe it was to make them easier to eat off of. Keep watching this video. We'll answer that question later. The shield, or scutum, was another key piece of equipment. It was large, rectangular, and curved, allowing the legionary to completely cover his body from enemy arrows and blows. The shield was made of several layers of wood glued together and covered with leather. In the center of the shield was a metal umbo, which not only protected the hand, but could also be used as a weapon to stun the enemy. Surprisingly, each shield was unique. Roman craftsmen painted various symbols and emblems on them to indicate their affiliation with a particular legion or cohort. This created a sense of unity and pride among the soldiers. The scutum was not just a shield, it was the basis of Roman tactics, the very wall that could not be broken. Its curved shape, resembling half a cylinder, was not accidental. It allowed the shields to fit tightly together, forming the famous turtle, or testudo, an invulnerable formation that protected the legionaries on all sides. This shape also allowed the shields to deflect blows and arrows, which slid off the surface without causing harm. At the core of the shield was a sturdy wooden structure. Several layers of plywood, glued and pressed together, created incredible strength with relatively little weight. The edges of the shield were reinforced with bronze or iron edging to prevent them from splitting. The outer side was covered with leather or canvas and then painted. The paintings on the shields were an important element. These were not just drawings, but symbols that indicated membership in a legion, cohort, or even a centurion. Each legion had its own unique emblems: animals, gods, or mythological creatures. These symbols not only helped soldiers navigate the heat of battle, but also strengthened their fighting spirit and sense of belonging to a great army. The shield was like a soldier's business card. The central element of the scutum, the umbo, was made of metal, iron or bronze. It served a dual purpose. It protected the arm holding the shield from blows and served as an effective weapon. In close combat, a legionnaire could use the umbo to deliver powerful, stunning blows. Its shape allowed for precise strikes to unprotected parts of the enemy's body, which often decided the outcome of a fight. The shield was an integral part of the legionaries' training. Soldiers spent countless hours practicing movements with the shield, learning to work in formation and maintain a tight formation. This required incredible discipline and synchronization. Each shield could weigh up to 10 kilograms, so working with it required strength and endurance that could only be achieved through long and persistent training. The scutum was a brilliant invention that reflected all the principles of Roman military thought: pragmatism, efficiency, and reliability. It was not just a piece of wood and metal, but a true symbol of Roman power and discipline. This shield allowed the Roman legions to defeat armies that outnumbered them, turning scattered soldiers into a single, indestructible mechanism. It was thanks to equipment, such as the scutum, that the Roman army was able to conquer and hold vast territories. The shield provided not only physical protection, but also a psychological advantage, instilling confidence in the hearts of the Romans and fear in the hearts of their enemies. The legionaries' main weapon was a short sword called a gladius. It was double-edged and ideal for close combat, allowing stabbing and slashing blows to be delivered in tight formations. Its hilt was made of wood or bone and was comfortable to grip. The dagger, or pugna, was a secondary weapon. It was smaller than the sword and was used as a last resort for self-defense, as well as for everyday needs such as cooking. Both of these items were inextricably linked to the life of a legionnaire. Sharpened to perfection, they were always ready for use. The gladius was designed for close combat. Its short but wide blade, 50 to 60 centimeters long, allowed for quick and accurate strikes in close quarters, where long weapons were useless. The main tactic of the Romans was to use a shield for protection and then deliver quick stabbing blows aimed at the enemy's vulnerable spots. The gladius, with its perfectly sharp tip, was designed specifically for this purpose. The sword's hilt was made of wood, bone, or ivory, which ensured a secure grip. The pommel, often shaped like a ball or mushroom, balanced the sword and prevented it from slipping out of the hand. The carrying of the gladius was strictly regulated. It was fastened to the belt on the right side, allowing legionaries to quickly draw it for attack. The gladius was more than just a weapon, it was a symbol of the legionary. The pugna, or dagger, was an auxiliary weapon, but no less important. It had a broad blade about 25 centimeters long, which could be used both in combat and in everyday life. The pugna was worn on the left side so as not to interfere with the gladius. It was indispensable as a last resort for self-defense when the sword proved too cumbersome. In addition, the dagger was a versatile tool used for cooking, repairing equipment, or building fortifications. Both types of weapons, the gladius and the pugnum, were the result of centuries of experience and constant improvement. The swords were forged from high-quality steel, which was hardened and sharpened to perfection. This process was complex and required great skill on the part of the blacksmith. Sharpening the sword was one of the most important duties of a legionnaire, and he spent a lot of time caring for his weapon. Unlike longer swords, the gladius was incredibly effective in hand-to-hand combat. Its short length allowed it to strike without hitting fellow soldiers in formation and quickly return to a defensive position. Hand-to-hand combat was the hallmark of the Roman army, and the gladius was designed specifically for this purpose. It was responsible for many victories and played a decisive role in the conquest of the empire. Now let's put our weapons aside and move on to an equally important part of Roman life. Do you know what was the biggest nightmare for a Roman legionnaire? Stay with us. The answer is coming soon in the video. All the clothing and equipment of a Roman soldier did not appear out of thin air. Thousands of craftsmen throughout the empire were responsible for their production. Woolen tunics and cloaks were woven in factories and home workshops. The leather for sandals, or Caligae, was tanned and processed by master tanners and then passed on to shoemakers, who sewed them together and added sturdy soles with nails. Production was streamlined, but quality was strictly controlled. The endurance of the army depended on the durability of its footwear, and thus the success of military campaigns. Metal armor, helmets, and weapons were the work of factories, state workshops that were under the control of the army. Blacksmiths, metallurgists, and gunsmiths worked in these workshops. They smelted iron and bronze, forged metal sheets, and joined them together to create lorica and helmets. Each element was made according to a strict pattern to ensure uniformity and interchangeability. The production of armor was a long and laborious process, but thanks to it, the Roman army was better equipped than any other in the world. Not only craftsmen were involved in the production of Roman military equipment, but also the legionaries themselves. Each legion had its own workshop, or fabrica, where soldier craftsmen repaired and manufactured weapons, armor, tents, and siege engines. This allowed them to quickly repair damage and replace losses without waiting for supplies from Rome. Soldiers skilled in blacksmithing, carpentry, or other crafts were exempt from certain combat duties and served as immunes, technicians. This approach made the army more autonomous and effective, allowing it to operate at great distances from the center. The economy of the Roman Empire was closely linked to military production. Large private workshops and state-owned fabrica worked for the army, receiving huge government orders. This stimulated the development of crafts and technologies throughout the empire. New mines were opened to extract iron and copper, and metalworking techniques were improved. The army was the largest consumer, and its needs shaped the market. Cities located near military bases became centers of production. For example, in Germany and Gaul, where there were large military contingents, workshops specializing in the production of leather goods and weapons flourished. The quantity and quality of Roman military uniforms and equipment depended not only on craftsmen, but also on logistics. A complex supply system was required to ensure that thousands of soldiers received identical equipment. Raw materials such as wool, leather, and metals were delivered from different regions of the empire to production centers. The finished products were then transported by land and sea to warehouses, and from there to the legions. It was a huge logistical network that required organization, coordination, and security. Military roads, the famous Roman roads, were built not only for the rapid movement of troops but also to support this complex supply system. Despite strict centralization, quality was not always perfect. Different technologies and materials could be used in different regions of the empire, leading to variations in design and durability. For example, armor made in Germany could differ from that produced in Egypt. However, common standards and strict controls allowed acceptable quality levels to be maintained. Production was geared towards mass production, but this did not mean that quality was sacrificed. On the contrary, every soldier had to be confident in his equipment, and this was the basis of Roman military doctrine. Equipment was not just an object, but a symbol of Roman power and discipline. The strict rules governing the production and wearing of uniforms reflected social order and hierarchy. The entire system, from the extraction of raw materials to the wearing of finished uniforms on the battlefield, was part of a huge military machine that allowed Rome to dominate for centuries. Roman soldiers served in all corners of the empire, from the hot deserts of Syria to the cold forests of Germany. Therefore, their uniforms had to be versatile. In hot climates, they wore lighter tunics and could even go without armor. Heavy cloaks called sagums were mainly used for protection from the sun and were thrown over the head. Caligae sandals were also comfortable as they provided good ventilation. They did not rub the feet, even when it was very hot. During the cold season, soldiers kept warm. They wore one or two more tunics under their main tunic to create a layered effect and better retain heat. Their feet were protected by wrappings or udons, thick woolen socks. Woolen caps were worn on the head. An important part of the winter uniform was the sagum, a heavy cloak that tightly wrapped the shoulders and neck, protecting against the biting wind and snow. It was not only warm, but also waterproof, which was extremely important in rainy weather. In addition to clothing, soldiers were issued special equipment for different climatic conditions. In the cold season, these were thick felt or leather gloves that protected the hands from frostbite. The legionnaires also had special shields that could be covered with leather in winter to prevent them from getting wet and freezing. Armor, in particular segmented lorica, was not the most comfortable option in freezing weather, as metal cooled quickly. Therefore, in cold climates, soldiers often preferred chainmail or scale armor, which retained heat better. This was a small but important change in equipment that increased the army's combat effectiveness in harsh conditions. Heat was also a serious problem for legionaries. In conditions where temperatures rose above 40 degrees, it was very important to avoid dehydration and heat stroke. Therefore, soldiers were allowed to leave some of their equipment and armor in the camp to avoid overheating. Moreover, tunics were made of light, breathable fabrics that allowed the skin to breathe. Helmets were equipped with special pads that protected the neck from direct sunlight. Water was carried in special leather bags, and its supply was one of the top priorities during long desert marches. Despite all these adaptations, disease remained the main problem. The transition from a hot climate to a cold one, and vice versa, often led to colds and other illnesses that could knock out entire cohorts. Therefore, Roman doctors paid great attention to hygiene and nutrition, and commanders made sure that soldiers did not get too cold or too hot. During rest stops, fires were lit for the soldiers, and during hot weather, they were given more water and salt. These simple measures helped to keep the legionaries healthy, which was no less important than their combat training. Depending on the region and time of year, the legions received appropriate equipment. For example, legions stationed in the British Isles constantly faced a damp and cold climate, and their uniforms were better suited to these conditions than those of legionaries in North Africa. This shows that the Roman army was not only powerful, but also very flexible, able to adapt to any conditions. The clothing and equipment of centurions and legates differed from the uniforms of ordinary soldiers. Centurions wore higher quality lorica, often decorated with bronze elements and silver overlays. Their helmets were more luxurious, with a transverse crest of feathers that made them easily recognizable on the battlefield. Centurions also wore greaves on their shins to protect their legs. On his belt hung not only a sword, but also a bunch of grapes, a symbol of his authority and a disciplinary tool. Legates, who commanded a legion, dressed even more elegantly. Their armor, although functional, was often decorated with gold and silver. Instead of sandals, they wore calçae, closed shoes similar to boots. Their cloaks were made of expensive fabrics and dyed purple, indicating their high status. The legate also wore a special cloak, the paludamentum, which was a symbol of his authority. These details not only distinguished the commanders, but also emphasized the hierarchy and order in the Roman army. Additional insignia for centurions were not limited to the crest and grapevine. Their belts, or cingulum, were wider and more richly decorated. In addition, they often carried fasces, bundles of rods that symbolized their authority. Centurions wore their swords on the left side, unlike ordinary soldiers, who wore them on the right. This allowed him to draw his weapon more easily without interfering with his shield. This detail was not only practical, but also served as another visual marker of his status and special position in the ranks. Legates, as senior commanders, rarely participated in direct combat. Their main task was to manage the legion and strategic planning. Therefore, their armor could be lighter and more decorative. They often wore musculata, anatomical armor that followed the contours of the body, or chainmail. The main symbol of their authority was the paludamentum, a large purple cloak that they wore over their tunics and armor. This cloak, whose color was reserved for the highest ranks, symbolized their connection to the Senate and Roman authority. The tribunes, who were also part of the command structure, wore a uniform that was a cross between the clothing of a common soldier and that of a legate. They wore a white tunic with a wide purple stripe called a laticlavus. Their armor could be the same as that of the legates, but without such luxury. Their footwear, calçae patrici, also indicated their noble origins. The tribunes' uniforms were less flashy than those of the legates, but still differed from the clothing of centurions and ordinary soldiers, emphasizing their role in the legion's administration. These differences in clothing and equipment played an important role in the Roman army. Not only did they allow the rank of an officer to be instantly identified on the battlefield, but they also emphasized the social hierarchy. Each element of the uniform was a symbol of power, responsibility, and position in society. It was a visual expression of the order and discipline that underpinned the Roman military machine. In addition to their basic uniform, each soldier had personal belongings that they could not do without. Attached to their belt was a pugna, a universal dagger that was used both as a weapon and as a tool for everyday needs. Soldiers carried a small bag with food, water, and personal belongings. Each piece of luggage was called a sarsina and was carried on a special stick that the soldier carried on his shoulder. Despite its weight, this equipment was vital for survival on the march. Each legionnaire had his own personal tools: a small pot for cooking, a spoon, and a set for shaving and personal hygiene. Roman soldiers were very clean and tried to maintain hygiene even in the field. These small but important details made their lives more comfortable and helped maintain discipline and order in the army. The equipment carried by legionaries also included a delabra, a special pickaxe used for building camps, digging trenches, and other engineering work. It was an indispensable tool that allowed the Roman army to quickly erect fortifications and overcome natural obstacles. Along with it, they carried a fossorium, a shovel that was also important for earthworks. These tools were heavy, but without them, it would have been impossible to wage war on such a scale. Each soldier carried a loculus, a small leather bag in which he kept his personal belongings. It could contain money, writing implements, talismans, and tools for repairing shoes and clothing. This was the soldier's personal property, which, despite strict discipline, was respected by commanders. Such small items helped to preserve a sense of individuality and connection to home. Another important piece of equipment was the sicca, a small sickle used to gather fodder and herbs. Soldiers often used it to prepare feed for horses and to gather edible plants while on campaign. It was light and practical, making it indispensable in the field. The use of such simple tools testifies to the pragmatism and endurance of the Roman army, which was ready for any challenge. The personal belongings of a Roman soldier were not a random collection of items. Each item was carefully thought out and had its own function, from the practical pugio to the symbolic loculus. These details not only ensured survival and comfort on the march, but also reflected discipline, order, and readiness for any difficulties. The Roman soldier was not only a warrior, but also an engineer, builder, and survivor, which made the Roman army one of the most effective in history. Thus, the equipment of a Roman soldier was much more complex than it might seem at first glance. Every element, from the tunic to the dagger, was carefully thought out and had its own purpose, making the Roman army one of the most effective in history. We hope you enjoyed this dive into the world of Roman equipment. What aspect of Roman soldiers' lives would you like to discuss in the next episode? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and we'll be sure to consider them. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new videos about the most fascinating historical facts.